Welcome to Bible Time.
All right, episode 46. So far, we've talked about, what to avoid whenever you serve Christ, that we run away from things like shame or fear of God's plan failing or entanglements. But we've also been looking at the other side of the coin of what should we embrace and what should we run towards whenever we serve Christ, and what exactly does that look like? And so we've talked about cool guy and Onesiphorus along with the soldier and the athlete and the farmer, and in doing so, we are learning what it looks like to bend the knee to Christ Jesus. And we learn more of what that looks like in verse 8 because Paul has said, you must remember Jesus Christ having been raised from the dead. And if the questions are, how do you do ministry? And how do you serve Christ? This is where it begins. It begins in the mind, where you consume yourself not once, but all the time, just over and over again, in putting Jesus Christ in the forefront of your mind, where he becomes the conviction of your soul that compels you to action, that shapes your entire life. This verse is the key to the way that Paul lives. And as our study continues today, we're going to look more and finish verse 8. So let's get right into this. Paul says, the descendant of David. The descendant of David. And this is one of the most epic verses in the entire Bible, because this is a title and a phrase that spans all of history. When Paul says that Jesus Christ is the descendant of David, that is big time, and let me explain why. All the way back in Genesis 3, verse 15, God promises that there will be this hero, that there will be this guy, and what this guy does is he has the ability to crush the head of the serpent, to crush the head of Satan. That's a serpent right there. That's a snake. And after the world spirals into chaos and darkness, that this guy right here, he becomes the hope of humanity, because the hope is this: if this guy can destroy Satan, then maybe he can destroy evil in its entirety and win the victory for his people. And when God makes promises to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that God will form the nation of Israel and that the nation will live in this special land in places like Genesis 12 and 15 and 17, what you learn is that the fate of the entire world, not just the nation of Israel, that it is attached to this hero right here. He becomes the means by which all the other nations are blessed, and he has the power to possess the gates of not just one enemy, but all of his enemies. In other words, this guy will be a king, and this guy will be a conqueror. And in Genesis 49 and in Numbers 24, we catch another glimpse of this king, because he establishes and he rules over this great and this exalted kingdom. He's the one who in the end will create a new earth and bring a new paradise free from things like sin and free from things like death. This king becomes the resolution. This king becomes the one who solves every problem and makes every wrong right. And when you read certain books in the Bible, like the book of Judges, you quickly learn how desperately we need this king. And one of the greatest questions of all time that you could ever ask yourself is who? Who is this king? Who is this king? And what you learn in places like 2 Samuel 7 is that this king will come from the line of David, that he will be a descendant of David. And when the Bible describes this descendant, it describes a person who can bring a better rest than David, who can bring a greater peace and security to not just Israel, but every single nation, who can bless the whole world, who will have the greatest name, who will die for the sins of his people, who can forgive sin and redeem and purchase a person out of spiritual slavery, who can transform a person and give them a new heart and make them holy, who wields the power of resurrection and can conquer death. That's crazy. And it is this: the descendant of David is the summation of God's promises. The fate of the world is attached to this king, and everything that is good and everything that is beautiful happens because of the descendant of David. And in the end, kings and lords bow down to the descendant of David because he is the King of kings and he is the Lord of lords, and he sits on the throne forever, and all nations serve him, and the whole earth is filled with his glory. This title, Descendant of David, is no small thing because all of history and all of eternity is shaped around the descendant of David. And Paul says that question of who right there, that has been answered because the descendant of David is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. That is the who. We know the answer. We know the answer. And look at this final phrase here. According to my gospel. According to my gospel. Notice how Paul says, according to my. According to my. In other words, for Paul, this is more than just a message like any other message. This was deeply personal. He was nearly beaten to death and lashed, stoned, shipwrecked, adrift at sea. He almost starved to death, thirsted. This was his everything. And you know why, because you know and you remember what happened on the road to Damascus, where God stepped in and altered the course of not just his journey, but his entire life. When God intervened in his life, he learned that this is a message of divine origin. This came from God himself. This is the message that can rescue a person from eternal condemnation. This is the message that will place in the end a believer face to face with the glory of Jesus Christ. And so 2 Timothy 2 verse 8, you must remember Jesus Christ, having been risen from the dead, the descendant of David according to my gospel, because he is your everything. And so for Timothy and for us, take this seriously, because you are under the lordship of Jesus Christ, but also take heart and take refuge, because you are under the care of a king unrivaled. In your darkest hour, the light of this king outshines everything else. And so that is your strength, that is your encouragement, that is your joy, and that is your hope.
All right, episode 46, and we are looking at the descendant of David. And that is what we want you to focus on during this question time. So if you guys take a look at Psalm 72 and Isaiah 52:12 through the end of 53, you guys can learn a little bit more about this descendant of David and how he's so important and awesome. And then discuss. And that is it. And we will see you guys back here tomorrow.